Hands where I can see them. You do not belong in this neighborhood." The words ripped through the quiet suburban street like a siren. Blue and red lights danced across the polished hood of a Bentley parked in its own driveway. Officers moved fast, batons ready, eyes sharp with suspicion. Neighbors poured out of their houses, phones lifted high, eager to capture what they thought was another spectacle. In the middle of it all stood Marcus Hill, calm, composed, dressed in a white suit that glowed under the midday Sunday. He had just returned from a day in court, but tonight, justice was about to be tried on his front lawn. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to Marcus. The officer closest to him barked louder, voice cracking like glass. "Step away from the car! This is not your house!" Another snatched the keys from Marcus's hand, shaking his head. "People like you do not drive cars like this. People like you do not live here," the crowd murmured, some neighbors smirking as if the accusation confirmed their own bias. A child on a scooter froze at the curb, eyes wide, clutching the handlebars tighter. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not flinch. He only said, steady and even, "This is my home. You are making a mistake." His words floated in the tense air, ignored by the officers who already had their radios buzzing. "Possible trespasser," one said into the receiver. "Blackmail, resisting compliance." The words carried weight, labeling him guilty before a question was asked. A woman in a floral dress whispered to her husband, "See? I told you. He never belonged here." Phones tilted higher. One neighbor muttered, "Get this on video. This is going to go viral." The lawn was no longer a front yard. It was a stage, charged, ready for confrontation. And the man at the center, Judge Marcus Hill, stood silent, knowing what they could not yet see. Power was already shifting. The second officer moved in closer, his boots grinding against the asphalt as if the sound alone could press Marcus into submission. "Identification. Now," he demanded, hand hovering near his holster. The street grew tighter, more suffocating, as if the air itself had chosen a side. Marcus calmly reached for his pocket, but before he could pull out anything, the first officer snapped. "Slow down, hands on the car." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. A teenager recording from across the street whispered to his friend, "They are really going to cuff him in his own driveway." The friend laughed nervously, not out of humor but disbelief, because the picture unfolding looked too familiar. Marcus placed both palms on the cool hood of his Bentley. He did not resist. He did not tremble. His reflection stared back at him from the flawless white paint, steady and unshaken. Yet the officer shoved his shoulder harder, pressing him down as if compliance itself was an act of defiance. "This is how it always starts," an older neighbor muttered under his breath, recording every second. "They see the skin first, and everything else becomes a threat." His wife tugged at his arm, whispering that they should go back inside, but he did not move. For once, silence felt like betrayal. One of the officers yanked the car keys higher, shaking them in front of Marcus's face. "You stole this. There is no way you walked into a dealership and paid for this car. Not in that suit, not in this neighborhood." His voice carried over the street, deliberate and humiliating. A few onlookers nodded as if the insult matched what they already believed, but Marcus did not break. His voice was low, almost calm against the chaos. "Every word you speak is another line you will regret." The officer sneered, mistaking restraint for weakness. "Save it for the judge," he shot back. The irony slid through the air like a hidden blade, because the man he was dismissing was the very judge who signed the warrants his precinct enforced. A young boy, no older than 10, whispered to his mother, "Why are they hurting him? He did not do anything." His mother could not answer. She only tightened her grip on his shoulder because she had seen this scene before, too many times. Meanwhile, the radios crackled louder. "Back up en route," a voice confirmed. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, the promise of more uniforms, more lights, more pressure. The stage was set for escalation. Marcus straightened as much as the officer's grip allowed, his words slicing through the tension. "I told you, this is my home." His tone did not plead. It warned. But no one listening believed him yet, and in the hum of bias and flashing lights, the truth waited like a verdict, not yet read aloud. The sirens grew closer, their pitch rising like a warning that justice was about to be twisted in plain sight. Two more squad cars turned into the cul-de-sac, tires crunching over the perfect pavement of the neighborhood. Doors slammed, and more officers spilled out, their presence heavy, their eyes already hard with judgment. The flashing lights painted the houses red and blue, like an uninvited parade of authority. Neighbors crowded tighter on their lawns, some clutching their phones as if recording could protect them from complicity. Others whispered in disbelief. How could he afford this house? How could he afford that car? A woman in a tailored blazer muttered, "He is probably renting. People like that never stay long." The words slipped into the air, casual but cutting, as if wealth and dignity had skin tones attached to them. The lead officer shoved Marcus harder against the Bentley, metal handcuffs clicking open behind him. "You are under investigation for trespassing and possible vehicle theft," he announced, loud enough for the crowd to hear. His tone was less about law and more about performance. This was not procedure. This was theater. Marcus inhaled slowly, his breath steady. He remembered another night, decades earlier, 20 years old, walking home from a late shift at the library where he studied to escape poverty. A patrol car had slowed beside him, windows rolled down, and a voice had shouted, "Where are you sneaking off to, boy?" That night he was searched on the sidewalk for carrying nothing more than textbooks. That memory never left him. And now, here it was again, repeating itself in front of the very home he had earned through decades of discipline. One of the younger officers hesitated. His grip on the baton loosened as he looked from Marcus's calm face to the growing line of neighbors with their cameras raised. "Sir, maybe we should verify." His voice trailed off when the sergeant snapped back. "Do not question me. He does not belong here." A murmur rose from the crowd. A man in a baseball cap muttered, "This does not look right. He has not raised his voice once." His friend shook his head, whispering, "That has never stopped them before." Marcus's eyes locked on the officer holding the cuffs. His voice was measured, low, but unshakable. "Be careful. Every action you take tonight will be written into the record." The officer sneered. "The only record that matters is my report." He yanked Marcus's wrist, forcing the cold steel closer. And then, the silence cracked. A teenage girl across the street spoke up, her phone still recording. "That is Judge Hill," she said, breathless. "I saw him on the news last month. He was in the courthouse. That is him." The words lingered, shaky but undeniable, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The officers froze for half a second, but their pride held firm. "Keep filming," the sergeant barked at the neighbors. "And you will be charged too." But the cameras did not lower. The phones stayed high. The air itself seemed to lean in, waiting for Marcus to speak again. And when he did, the balance of power in that driveway began to shift. The handcuffs hovered inches from Marcus's wrists, the metallic clink echoing like a countdown. The lead officer pressed him harder against the car, voice sharp and certain. "You are not going inside that house. Not tonight. Not ever. Now show us proof, or you are going downtown." His words dripped with contempt, each syllable designed to strip away dignity. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not fight. He simply lifted his head, eyes steady beneath the swirl of police lights. "This is my home. My name is on every document tied to it. You are making a grave mistake." The officer laughed, bitter and dismissive. "Paperwork does not make it yours. Men like you use fake names, fake cards, fake stories, but you cannot fake belonging here." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some neighbors nodded, complicit in silence. Others shook their heads, recording every second. A young boy whispered to his father, "Why are they calling him a thief? He is just standing there." His father had no answer, only a clenched jaw that betrayed a familiar ache. Another officer stepped forward, pulling Marcus's keys from his pocket without permission. He dangled them in front of the crowd, his voice loud and mocking. "You see this? He says this Bentley is his. Look at him. Look at those hands. Look at that face. Do you really believe it?" A woman near the curb laughed nervously, but her phone stayed up, trembling as she streamed the scene live. Marcus remained still. His silence was deliberate, more cutting than any shouted protest. To him, words were not weapons to be wasted. They were verdicts, to be delivered only when the room, or in this case, the street was ready to hear them. The sergeant leaned closer, so close his breath fogged the side mirror. "You people always think you can hide behind calm voices and fancy cars, but we see through it. You are a trespasser. Admit it now, and maybe we let you walk away." For a moment, the street fell quiet, the air charged, waiting. And then Marcus spoke, calm as a judge delivering a sentence. I will not admit to a lie, and I will not bend for your prejudice. This is my house. These are my keys, and your words will weigh heavier on you than these cuffs could ever weigh on me. Oh. The younger officer who had hesitated earlier looked down, shame flickering across his face. He knew what was unfolding was not law. It was bias dressed as authority. But before he could speak, the sergeant shoved Marcus again, louder this time. Enough! You do not belong here! The crowd gasped. Some voices rose in protest. A teenage girl shouted, Stop! He told you who he is! You are not listening! The cameras caught every word, every push, every insult. And though Marcus stood silent once more, the weight of injustice was already burning into the record. In that silence, the question hung heavy. How far would they go before the truth forced its way out? The flashing lights painted the street in a constant strobe, red and blue bleeding across white fences and manicured lawns. The driveway was no longer just a strip of concrete. It was a stage where every glance, every word, every shove was being judged by an unseen jury, the neighbors with phones raised high, streaming to an audience far beyond the cul-de-sac. From the corner house, an elderly man stepped out slowly, leaning on his cane. His voice was thin but firm as he spoke toward the officers. I have lived here 30 years. That man bought this house. I saw him move in. He belongs here. His words should have broken the tension, but instead the sergeant waved him off, barking, Get back inside. Do not interfere with police business. The old man's face fell, but he did not move. His phone stayed in his hand, trembling but recording. Another witness joined, a teenage girl clutching her backpack. She shouted from the sidewalk, That is Judge Hill. I recognize him. He was on the news last month. Murmurs ran through the crowd like ripples on water, but the officers refused to look at her. One sneered, You kids think every man in a suit is famous. Stay out of this. The scene twisted tighter. A mother pulled her daughter closer, whispering, Watch carefully. This is how they do it. Her voice carried pain, not surprise, because she had seen the script before. Marcus stood firm, the metal of the car warm under his palms. His silence was heavy, deliberate, almost unbearable for those watching. He knew words thrown too early would vanish like smoke, but words delivered at the right moment could change the entire trial. The sergeant gestured toward Marcus's front door, his voice sharp. Who gave you the code to get in? Whose house is this really? Tell the truth before you dig yourself deeper. Another officer chimed in, his tone dripping disdain. Men like you do not own homes like this. Not in neighborhoods like this. Gasps filled the air. The mask of professionalism had fallen away, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. A woman live streaming whispered to her audience, Did you hear that? He just said it. Not in neighborhoods like this. That is not law. That is racism. Comments began to flood her phone, hearts and angry faces scrolling up the screen. The outside world was watching now, judging. Marcus finally turned his head, his eyes steady. You think I do not belong here because of the way I look, but belonging is not yours to grant. This home is mine. This ground is mine. And every second you continue this charade, the world sees you for what you are. The crowd stirred louder. Some voices cheered him. Others whispered doubt. But no one could ignore the conviction in his tone. The sergeant stiffened, gripping the cuffs tighter as if force could erase truth. And then, the air shifted. A boy no older than 12 shouted from across the street, Leave him alone! He lives there! His voice cracked, but it cut deeper than any order. The cameras caught it. The neighbors heard it. And for the first time that night, the officers hesitated. In that pause, the story began to slip from their control. The silence was no longer Marcus's burden. It was their indictment. The hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat the entire street felt it. The officers looked at each other, uneasy cracks showing through their armor of authority, yet the sergeant, unwilling to let go of control, barked louder than before. Backup is already here, we are not asking again. Show proof of residence or you are under arrest. His voice was a hammer trying to pound doubt back into obedience. Marcus did not move from the hood of his Bentley. His face was still, his shoulders straight, his silence more commanding than any badge on that street. When he finally spoke, his words cut with surgical precision. You are not asking for proof. You are denying my existence, that is the difference. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. The teenage girl recording whispered, He has not raised his voice once, but he is winning every word. Her phone's screen filled with comments. This is unlawful. They are profiling him. Stay strong, Judge. But the officers pressed harder. One yanked Marcus's wallet from his jacket without permission, flipping it open in front of the crowd. He scoffed at the sight of a black leather ID case. Fake. These guys always carry props to look important. He tossed it on the hood as if it were trash. The insult stung not because Marcus believed it, but because it was familiar. For a moment his mind flashed back to being 25, walking into a dealership in Atlanta wearing the same calm expression, only to be told, "Son, we do not park test drive cars on this side of town." They never handed him the keys. They never believed he could buy. That memory burned in his chest now as these officers repeated the same story, word for word, decades later. Neighbors shifted uneasily. A woman whispered to her husband, "They took his wallet. They will not even look at it. What are they afraid of?" The husband shook his head, muttering, "The truth." The sergeant lifted the cuffs higher, snapping them open with a sharp metallic crack. "Last chance. Admit you are trespassing." His voice thundered down the driveway, echoing against white garage doors and glass windows. Marcus finally lifted his eyes, locking on the sergeant's face. His voice was low but unwavering. "I will not confess to a crime you invented. You are not protecting this neighborhood. You are protecting your prejudice." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of sirens and the rustle of phones capturing every second. Then came another witness, unexpected and undeniable. From the far side of the cul-de-sac, a woman in a city uniform stepped forward. She had been jogging when she stopped, pulled by the flashing lights. Her voice rang out clear. "I know who that is. That is Judge Marcus Hill. He presided over my cousin's trial. He is not a trespasser. He is a federal judge." The crowd erupted in gasps, phones tilted higher. The teenage girl shouted, "I told you! He is the judge!" For the first time, the sergeant's hand wavered on the cuffs. The certainty drained from his posture. His authority, once absolute, was suddenly on trial in the very street he thought he controlled. The revelation did not stop the sergeant. His pride was louder than reason, his authority heavier than truth. "Federal judge?" he scoffed, voice booming so the neighbors could hear. "That is a nice story, but we are not stupid. Judges do not dress like this. Judges do not walk around without security. This man is lying, and every second you defend him makes you part of the lie." The younger officer beside him shifted uncomfortably, but the sergeant barked again. "Cuff him now." The order cracked the air like a gavel. Another officer stepped forward and seized Marcus's arm, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. Gasps erupted from the crowd. A woman shouted, "He told you who he is. He belongs here." Her voice shook with outrage, but the officers ignored her. The handcuffs clinked closer, steel against steel, ready to close around the wrist of a man who had sentenced criminals, defended victims, and upheld the very constitution that these men claimed to serve. The irony was suffocating. Marcus's head lifted slowly, his voice controlled, deliberate. "You think power lies in the cuffs you carry, but power lies in truth. And tonight, truth is standing in front of you." The officer gripping him sneered, forcing his arm higher. "You are resisting." The words were shouted for the crowd, a performance for the cameras, an attempt to rewrite reality in real time. Neighbors called out in protest. The old man with the cane lifted his trembling voice. "He is not resisting. You are fabricating it." His wife clutched his arm, but he did not stop. For the first time, people on that street who had always stayed silent began to raise their voices. Still, the sergeant pressed forward. "We do not need more words. We need compliance." He motioned again for the cuffs. And then the act of humiliation came. One officer grabbed Marcus's wallet from the hood, opened it again, and deliberately tore the corner of his identification card in front of him. "Fake," he declared. "Fraud." The crowd gasped in horror. A teenager shouted, "That is destruction of evidence. You cannot do that." Phones caught every angle, every insult, every shred of prejudice laid bare. Marcus did not move, even as the insult hung heavy. His eyes burned steady as he spoke, his tone sharp but still composed. "You just committed a crime against a federal judge, and unlike you, I do not need to shout for the truth to be heard." For the first time, silence rippled through the officers. The accusation did not sound like a threat. It sounded like a verdict. But the sergeant doubled down, red-faced and sweating under the weight of his own arrogance. "Enough. Call for full detainment. We will sort this out downtown." Radios crackled. Backup was already forming. The cuffs were seconds away from snapping shut. And in that breathless moment, the entire neighborhood leaned in, because everyone knew the storm had reached its peak and something irreversible was about to happen. The radio on the sergeant's shoulder hissed with static. Then a sharp voice confirmed, "Additional units en route." The words landed like nails sealing a coffin. More cars, more lights, more weight pressing against the truth. The sergeant straightened, convinced the night was his to script. But Marcus moved first. Calmly, deliberately, he shifted just enough to free one hand from the officer's grip. The crowd gasped, phones tilted higher, expecting resistance. Instead, Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone with a slow, measured motion that silenced even the officers for a heartbeat. He spoke into it with a clarity that cut through the chaos. "Activate protocol. Document every shove, every word, every second of unlawful detainment." His tone was not a plea, it was command, precise and unyielding. On the other end, a voice answered instantly, crisp and professional. "Confirmed, Your Honor. Internal Affairs has been alerted. The system is live. All audio and video are being logged." The sergeant froze, eyes narrowing, unwilling to accept what he had just heard. "Your Honor," he repeated, mocking, "this is a show. He is bluffing." Ho! But the phone on speaker did not lie. The voice continued. "This incident has been time-stamped and escalated. Federal Court Administration is monitoring." The crowd erupted in gasps. A woman clasped her hand over her mouth. The teenager shouted, "I told you! He is the judge!" The old man with the cane muttered, "Dear God, they are digging their own graves." Still, the sergeant barked louder, desperate to drown the rising tide. "Shut that phone off! That is not proof." He lunged for it, but Marcus pulled his hand back with the grace of someone who had been here before. Calm, unbroken, immovable. Marcus's voice dropped low, steady as stone. "Every action you take is already evidence. You cannot erase it. You cannot outrun it. Tonight, your names write themselves into history." The younger officer, the one who had hesitated earlier, stepped back now, visibly shaken. His baton lowered. He looked at the sergeant and whispered, "Sir, maybe we should stop. What if he really is?" "Silence!" the sergeant snapped, his voice cracking. Sweat traced down his temple. The certainty in his stance was slipping. The neighbors pushed closer to the edge of their lawns, some no longer whispering but speaking out loud. "This is abuse!" one woman shouted. "He told you who he is. You will regret this." Another man added, "You cannot arrest a federal judge in his own driveway." The scene had shifted. Authority was no longer absolute. Control was slipping, inch by inch, not because Marcus fought, but because he did not need to. Marcus raised his eyes to meet the sergeant's. His words came like a gavel strike. "You think I stand alone, but tonight, the law stands with me, and you will answer to it." The phones caught every syllable. The silence that followed was not obedience, it was fear. And for the first time that night, the officers felt it pressing back at them. The driveway had become a courtroom without walls. Every phone camera, a witness stand, every neighbor, a juror. The officers who once carried themselves with unchecked confidence now looked like defendants caught in their own trial. Still, the sergeant clung to control, his pride louder than his judgment. "Enough of this," he barked, his voice cracking. "You are under arrest, fraudulent identity, impersonation of a federal officer." The crowd erupted. A chorus of voices rose from the street, outrage spilling into the night air. "He is not impersonating anyone, that is Judge Hill," shouted the teenage girl with her phone still raised. The old man with the cane leaned forward, voice trembling but fierce. "I have lived long enough to know a lie when I hear one, and right now, the lie is wearing a badge." The sergeant ignored them. His hand shot forward, gripping Marcus's wrist again, ready to slam the cuffs shut. But Marcus did not flinch. Instead, he slowly lifted his phone higher, placing it on speaker for all to hear. A new voice filled the air. Deep, authoritative, impossible to dismiss. "This is Chief Justice Raymond Cole. Judge Hill is exactly who he says he is, and any officer who lays a hand on him tonight will answer to the federal courts." The words dropped like thunder. The street fell silent except for the hum of idling squad cars. The sergeant froze mid-motion, his grip loosening on instinct. His face paled as the reality struck this was no bluff. Gasps swept through the crowd. Neighbors who had doubted moments before now covered their mouths in shock. One man whispered, "They almost arrested a federal judge in his own driveway." Another woman muttered, "Almost? They already tried." Marcus lowered the phone slightly, his eyes never leaving the sergeant's. His voice was calm, sharp, final. "I told you, this is my home. You mistook silence for weakness. That was your last mistake." "Oh." The younger officer stepped back fully now, baton hanging loose at his side. His voice cracked as he muttered, "Sir, we cannot do this. He is telling the truth." His words, captured on dozens of phones, shattered the illusion of unity among the officers. The sergeant's jaw clenched, sweat running down his temple. Pride fought with panic, but the balance had shifted, and he could feel it. He turned to his men, barking softer this time. "Stand down. Just stand down." The crowd erupted again, this time in applause and relief. Some cheered. Others shouted demands for apologies. The teenage girl cried out, "We got it all on video. Every word, every shove." Marcus remained still, his composure unbroken. He did not smile. He did not gloat. His words were deliberate, each one landing like a sentence delivered in court. "I do not need your apology. I need your accountability. Tonight you revealed yourselves, and tomorrow the law will reveal what that means." Phones kept recording, the night heavy with the knowledge that what had just unfolded was no longer just a confrontation. It was evidence. Evidence that would echo far beyond that driveway. The moment the sergeant's voice cracked with the order to stand down, the entire street seemed to shift. The same neighbors who had watched silently at first now stepped forward, emboldened by truth. A young mother holding her daughter's hand said loudly, "We all saw it. He told you this was his house. You ignored him. You humiliated him." Her words were not just outrage, they were testimony, captured by every phone still pointed toward the driveway. The officers looked around uneasily, trapped in the cage of their own making. The younger officer dropped his baton fully, hands raised slightly as if he wanted to distance himself from the sergeant's choices. The others exchanged nervous glances. None of them had expected the crowd to turn, but the tide had shifted beyond their control. Marcus straightened, no longer leaning against the Bentley. He adjusted his jacket, a simple gesture, but it radiated authority. His silence was a judgment, heavier than any words the sergeant could muster. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice even and deliberate. "You thought the badge was your shield, but tonight it has become your mask, and that mask has slipped." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones trembled as they kept recording. The old man with the cane raised his voice again. "He is right. You called him a trespasser in front of all of us. You tore his identification. You nearly put him in cuffs. And now you want to walk away as if nothing happened?" The sergeant's face reddened. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Marcus lifted his phone once more. The voice of Chief Justice Cole came back onto the line, sharp and final. "Judge Hill, Internal Affairs is already en route. Continue documenting. These officers will be suspended effective, immediately pending investigation." The sergeant's mouth snapped shut. His hands twitched at his sides, powerless now, his authority dissolving in real time. The crowd buzzed with shock, some neighbors whispering, "Suspended! Right here, right now!" Marcus lowered the phone, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "You wanted to write me out of my own home, but tonight, you wrote yourselves out of your own careers." The teenage girl cheered, her livestream comments exploding with emojis and exclamation points. The young boy who had spoken earlier tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, he stopped them. He really stopped them." His mother nodded, tears in her eyes. That is what real strength looks like. The officers, once the image of dominance, now stood frozen, stripped of power not by force but by truth. They looked smaller under the glare of phone screens, under the gaze of neighbors who would no longer pretend not to see. Marcus's presence filled the driveway. He was not shouting, not gloating, only standing in the full weight of who he was. And in that moment, the story was no longer about suspicion. It was about revelation. A community had witnessed injustice. A community had seen the truth. And a community was now unwilling to forget it. The silence that followed was thick, not with tension, but with certainty. Justice was not coming tomorrow. Justice had already arrived. The silence broke with the sound of another squad car pulling into the street. But this one did not bring reinforcement for the officers. It brought judgment. A dark sedan with tinted windows rolled up slowly, the seal of internal affairs gleaming on its door. The crowd erupted in whispers, phones pivoting to capture the new arrival. For the first time, the officer's eyes widened with genuine fear. Two investigators stepped out, plainclothes but unmistakably official. One of them carried a tablet already glowing with live-streamed footage from the scene. The other spoke with cold authority. "We have received multiple alerts. Every second of this incident has been documented and broadcast. Stand down immediately. All officers involved, place your badges on the hood of your vehicles." Oh. The words cut deeper than any handcuffs could. One by one, reluctant hands reached to unclip badges, the metal catching the streetlights, as if mocking the weight they once carried. The younger officer who had hesitated earlier laid his badge down quickly, his voice breaking as he muttered, "I never wanted this to go this far." The sergeant, red-faced and trembling, held out longer, but under the watchful eyes of neighbors and cameras, he too surrendered his badge at last. The crowd erupted in applause, not out of joy, but out of vindication. For years, they had watched scenes like this unfold on screens far away. Tonight, it had unfolded in their own neighborhood, and justice had arrived at their front doors. Marcus stood in the center of it all, silent, composed. The investigator approached him with a respectful nod. "Your Honor, you are safe now. We will take it from here." But Marcus did not step aside. His eyes swept across the faces of the men who had humiliated him minutes before. His voice was calm, every word measured like a final verdict. "Safe is not enough. These men tried to erase me from my own home. They thought my silence was submission. But silence is not weakness. It is evidence. And tonight it has spoken louder than all their voices combined." The neighbors erupted again, their cheers raw and emotional. The teenage girl live streaming whispered into her phone, "This is history. We are watching it happen." The old man with the cane leaned forward, tears welling in his eyes. "I never thought I would see the day." The sergeant, now stripped of badge and authority, tried to mutter a defense. We were only following procedure." Marcus's gaze cut him down instantly. Procedure does not tear up identification. Procedure does not invent crimes out of prejudice. And procedure does not end with internal affairs stripping you of the badge you abused. The weight of the words hung heavy in the air. The officers stared at the ground, unable to meet his eyes, while the crowd recorded every second. They were no longer just bystanders. They were witnesses, and witnesses carry memory like fire. Marcus took a single step forward, his voice low but unshakable. "This driveway is no longer your stage. It is your sentence, and the world will read it." The applause swelled again, louder, uncontainable, echoing through the cul-de-sac like the gavel of justice itself. The last squad car rolled away, its flashing lights shrinking into the night, leaving only the quiet hum of the street. The crowd did not disperse right away. Neighbors stood still, as if rooted by what they had just witnessed. Phones slowly lowered, but no one wanted to break the moment. It was not just an ending, it was a reckoning. Marcus stood tall in his driveway, the white suit gleaming under the street lamp. He had not shouted, he had not fought, yet the balance of the entire night had shifted around his calm presence. His voice carried once more, deep and measured, every word deliberate. "You thought I was trespassing in my own home. You thought my silence meant surrender. But silence is not surrender. Silence is strength. And tonight, it spoke louder than all of you." The old man with the cane nodded firmly, whispering to his wife, "That is dignity. That is power." The teenage girl, still live streaming, held her phone close and said softly, "Remember this moment. This is what real justice looks like." Her viewers filled the screen with hearts and words of support, proof that the story was no longer contained to one street, it was spreading everywhere. Marcus turned toward his front door. For a long moment he simply stood there, looking at the home he had built, the place nearly taken from him by prejudice disguised as law. His final words cut the air, simple and unforgettable. "Justice does not need to knock. It lives here." And tonight, it answered. The crowd erupted in applause, louder, freer than before. It was not for a man alone. It was for what he represented, for every voice silenced, for every dignity denied, for every person who had been told they did not belong. The night closed with Marcus stepping inside his house, unbroken, unbent, leaving behind a street forever changed. The gavel had fallen, not in a courtroom, but on the very pavement of his own driveway. And the verdict was clear. Justice had prevailed.